Welcome back. 2 days after the Senate confirmed Jay Clayton as the new director of national intelligence, he's still not been sworn in. That's according to a U.S. official with knowledge of the matter. Let's figure out why. Joining us, MS Now Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian. MS Now National Security and Intelligence Analyst and former Assistant FBI Special Agent in Charge, Michael Feinberg. And MS Now Senior National Security Reporter David Rohde. Thank you all for being with us. David, let's start with you. You're just back from reporting about Clayton at the White House. You've also just spoken to Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia. What's the latest? What can you tell us about what's happening with Clayton?
I don't have an update. So the White House was unable to answer why 2 days have gone by after the Senate confirmed Jay Clayton. He hasn't taken office yet. There's been reporting by Politico that Bill Pulte, the current acting director of national intelligence, he's the head of a federal housing agency who has no intelligence experience. And there was a real push by congressional Republicans to support Jay Clayton, which they did when they confirmed him, and get Pulte out. But allegedly, Pulte's asking for more time on the job, and everyone I've talked to is baffled. And so Senator Warner, he's the second official now saying that he's the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. He has no inclination when Pulte's going to be sworn in, and he gave me a statement about this, and he just said how important this moment is. We're at war, but he said, why confirm someone for one of our nation's most important intelligence posts if no one can say when they'll actually take office? So the president's holding a cabinet meeting tomorrow at Camp David, and I asked folks at the White House who will be representing the DNI, an agency created after 9/11 to better coordinate, intelligence sharing to prevent attacks on this country, and they couldn't tell me whether it would be Bill Pulte or Jay Clayton, who the Senate just confirmed.
It's a pretty extraordinary admission, especially at a time of war. Ken, Jay Clayton refused to acknowledge that Joe Biden won the 2020 election, and yet Democrats are clamoring for him to take the post, not Bill Pulte, which is such a reflection on Bill Pulte. What do we think he's up to right now? Is it another round of layoffs, more election interference? What do you think?
I was going to say, that says a lot, right, what you just described there. Look, the only reason Bill Pulte was installed in this job is to make mischief about the elections. They were very clear about that. And then he happened to lay off a bunch of people, and we still don't really understand the ramifications of that and who actually was laid off. But we should all be very disturbed about this. What is Bill Pulte doing behind the scenes in terms of, things that are related to election security and foreign interference in the election? Why do they want him to remain there, even for a couple of more days? It's baffling because Jay Clayton, as you said, while he did not cover himself with glory in that hearing, is still highly regarded by some members of the Senate.
Yeah, so Democrats said they were, of course, disappointed in his answer, but they'd rather have that than Pulte. Ken, let's turn to, I want to ask you about a new Senate report. I know you've been doing some reporting on this. You've been looking at how the Trump administration has dismantled counterterrorism protections that were put in place after 9/11. And during the break, we were reminiscing. It's extraordinary that it was been 25 years since those attacks. Tell us what in this report matters.
Yeah, we've been reporting on this as kind of a slow-rolling disaster, but what this report by the Homeland Security Democrats does is puts it all together and says, look, what the Trump administration has done is dismantled that counterterrorism infrastructure that was built up right after 9/11 and then sort of honed and perfected over the last 25 years. And there's a number of elements to this. The biggest thing is they've just downsized the FBI counterterrorism division and the Justice Department's national security division, and they've gotten rid of a lot of the foremost experts in terrorism, including people that worked on the cases like the classified documents case, because that was a national security case, right? So they've rid the government of fundamental expertise. They've also sort of shifted the focus to this obsession with left-wing terrorism, when actually in recent years, far-right extremists have been a serious threat. And Chris Wray, the former FBI director, used to talk about that all the time. They don't even pay attention to that. The far-right extremists are not even mentioned in their counterterrorism strategy. So you have downsizing, shifting of priorities. And I spoke to Gary Peters, the ranking Democrat who oversaw this report. Take a listen. He described this in very stark terms. Take a listen to him.
Fundamentally, we are less safe today than we were before Donald Trump came into office, because he's been basically dismantling the apparatus that keeps us safe.
I mean, he's saying we are less safe as Americans, and we're not going to know exactly what the weaknesses are until something really bad happens.
So, Michael, let's go to you now. What is your verdict? How how much less safe? I mean, how dangerous is these cutbacks?
I think they're fairly dangerous because the threat landscape facing the United States from external enemies has not really changed. If anything, it's probably a little bit heightened because of the war we started with Iran. But at the same time, as Ken noted, we have been deprioritizing counterterrorism investigations, maybe not overtly, but by moving resources and personnel away from them. And Ken's also right. The threat from right-wing domestic terrorism is a much more salient one in this day and age than left-wing domestic terrorism. And that's not a judgment on political ideologies in general. These things switch. There have been periods where it's the opposite. But January 6th and the subsequent pardons of everybody convicted for the actions there really emboldened the right-wing domestic terrorist sphere. And what I fear is happening is that by refusing to admit that that might be a problem in the future, they're not being monitored or investigative now, which means they're going to have a good 4 years to regroup in a way that the January 6th investigations prevented. And we know what happens when these people are upset with the results of elections. And it's almost guaranteeing that, come 2028, we might have a crisis on our hands.
I mean, David Rohde, let's take together Michael's, I think, stark and very accurate warning just now, the cutbacks to counterterrorism, and then how we started this block, the fact that the DNI is either vacant or it's being held by a rank amateur without the necessary required intel experience. This, to me, is a bright red alarm going off.
It is, and it's just a basic issue of just competence of running competence running these incredibly important agencies, and then also basically aides around the president who focus on what he cares about. And what Bill Pulte played a major role in was this big speech the president rolled out about American election systems being unsafe, which, he released classified documents. He didn't produce any proof that any votes had been changed in 2020. And so you just have this constant focus on pleasing the president, cutting jobs, which was partly what Pulte was doing at ODNI, and then, as Ken talked about, also at the FBI. And all of this is, as was said, all of this appears to be weakening national security and putting the American public at risk.